Hello, this is Mike from Urban Legends and Mythology. I don't really want to go onto a long-winded historical rant today. You saw the title, you know what it's about. We're talking about lost treasures of World War II. And to be honest, this is my second attempt at recording this show fresh because, to be honest, I was going through the original recording of this episode and I was making myself fall asleep from how boring it was when I was diving into all the historical context of the whole issue surrounding World War II and the rampant art looting. And in doing that, I realized that nobody cares about the historical context. You just want to hear about lost treasure. So let's deep dive into that. But for those of you who do want to hear the real historical context, or who really want a deep dive into the history, let me know. I'll release some of it as like a bonus episode or something. So let's start at the beginning. And to be honest, this really starts before the beginning. It starts when the fucking Nazis seized power in Germany in 1933. And while they're consolidating this new dictatorial power over the German state, they do take a serious focus on art. So art styles like post-impressionism, surrealism, fauvism, cubism, data, expressionism, and avant-garde, which were really popular during the Weimar period in the 1920s. It all fell under this umbrella that the Nazis called degenerate art. They stated that this art was kind of eroding the culture of Germany. And as a reaction to this degenerate art, they were banning it from being shown in galleries. This art was being seized by the state. Artists and musicians who favored these art styles and really pushed for them were being dismissed from teaching positions. Now, a lot of this artwork was destroyed. There are two instances, one in I believe it was 1938 in Germany and another instance in Paris in 1942, where these pieces of degenerate art were burned in large bonfires as kind of a message to the people: do not create or indulge in this art. A lot of this art, which was looted from museums and even Jewish families who were a major target in this looting, was auctioned off in international markets, mostly in Switzerland, to private collectors around the world in order to raise funding for their regime. And over 650 pieces of art ended up in this very perverse exhibit in a German museum in 1937. So during this exhibition, they took these pieces of art into this room and they kind of haphazardly slapped them all over the walls. Sculptures were basically just tossed anywhere in the room. And amongst all these pieces of art was all this German graffiti. And the graffiti was inflammatory. It mocked the art and the artists. And the whole thing was designed to be perverse. It was designed to inflame public opinion against modernist art. And they're doing all this to essentially promote their values, promote the regime. And it's not just art that the Germans are seizing from the people, mostly the minorities, and peoples considered to be enemies of the state. They are taking literally anything and everything of value from these people. So they're seizing artwork, they're seizing property, they're seizing their gold, they're seizing their silver, their diamonds. Eventually they seize their very labor and their lives, all in order to not only enrich themselves but to fund their growing war machine. And they use this new war machine to kick off World War II Electric Boogaloo. So when they're marching through Europe, invading these countries, they had these units attached to their militaries, and the goal of these units was to go into these newly conquered, occupied territories and seize all their valuable shit. So gold, silver, currency, cultural items, and specifically art were all seized under the guise of protecting these treasures. Now, some of this stuff, like art from unknown artists that nobody cares about, that stuff would most likely just be burned. More valuable treasures of state, which would be found in museums, would be seized and housed in these like storage areas, with the plan being, okay, we can leave them in a museum, we can sell it on the international market, they can end up in private collections. Essentially, they would find out whatever the purpose of this is and they would use it for that purpose. And when we're talking in terms of sheer volume, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of pieces of art, billions of dollars worth of gold, property, silver, assets, diamonds, jewelry. Approximately 20% of the art of Europe, that is all of Europe, was looted during World War II. Over 100,000 cultural artifacts are still missing to this day. However, not all of these treasures are lost forever. They still pop up all the time in private collections across the world. So originally a lot of this art was just being warehoused, but as the Allies started marching across Europe and the bombing of German cities became a thing, they started moving a lot of this artwork in gold into mines, particularly salt mines. And they did this because, one, it's underground, it'll probably be protected from Allied bombing, and two, these caves and salt mines provided the correct conditions for the storage of art. So these caves and salt mines have the proper temperature and humidity so the artwork won't deteriorate. And it was in the closing days of the war when the Allies would come across these massive treasure troves of gold and art and plunder from all around Europe. And in subsequent years and decades, we would be able to catalog just about every artifact that was found in these storage places. However, a lot of stuff was never recovered, and it fuels these mysteries of where this stuff could possibly have gone. So one mystery is of the Amber Room in Russia. So the Amber Room is a chamber decorated in amber panels with gold leaf and mirrors. It's located in the Catherine Palace of Tsarskoye Selo near St. Petersburg. It took me 4 takes to say Tsarskoye, and I don't even know if I said it right. Sorry, Russians. So this room, or more importantly the panels that go on the walls of this room, is made up of 13,000 pounds of fossilized amber. It's large enough to cover about 55 square meters or 590 square feet, which is actually just a little bit bigger than my apartment. It was originally created in Prussia in the early 1700s, and it was installed at the Berlin City Palace until 1716. When the then Prussian king Frederick Wilhelm I gifted it to Tsar Peter the Great of the Russian Empire. It was installed in the Catherine Palace, and it was considered the 8th wonder of the world. And these panels essentially remain in the Catherine Palace until early 1941. So shortly after Operation Barbarossa kicks off, which is the German invasion of the Soviet Union for those of you at the back of the class, the curators who were responsible for removing the art treasures in Leningrad, they tried to disassemble and remove the Amber Room. However, over the years the amber had become brittle, making it almost impossible to move the room without these amber panels crumbling. So what these Russian curators did was they simply put up wallpaper over these panels, hoping that when the Germans come in, they just find a mundane wallpapered room and they don't realize that this is the Amber Room. Well, that ruse didn't work. So when these German soldiers came in, they were probably German soldiers of the 16th or 18th Army. It was all under this umbrella called Army Group North, but I digress. They come into the palace, they come into the room with some experts, like some really great German art experts, I guess, or preservation experts or something. And it's said that within 36 hours of them getting there, under the supervision of these experts, they had carefully removed the panels from this room. And we know precisely where these panels go, so on 14 October 1941, the room reached Königsberg in East Prussia. And we know that between October 14th and 13 November 1941, they had completed putting these panels in this room in Königsberg Castle because a November 13 newspaper states an upcoming exhibition of this room. Essentially, it was like, hey, that was made in Prussia, it belongs in Prussia, we're bringing it back to Prussia. And we know that the Amber Room was still in the castle up until the end of the war, because on January 21st, Hitler, Captain Dickbag Nazi Fuck himself, he ordered the movement of looted possessions from Königsberg because the Red Army was advancing. And it's during this time when the Amber Room is disassembled once again. It's crated up and it's stored in the basement of Castle Königsberg. However, before it could be moved, a man by the name of Erich Koch, who was in charge of civil administration in Königsberg during the final months of the war, he abandons his post and flees the city. Now, Königsberg Castle would be destroyed by heavy Allied bombing and artillery fire from the advancing Red Army. And to this day, the whereabouts of those panels is still a mystery, because after World War II, to, the Amber Room disappears. It's never seen nor heard from again. Now the logical conclusion is the priceless Amber Room is still buried under the ruins of Königsberg Castle. And since 2001, there had been numerous excavations of the underground tunnels and cellars of that castle. And while these archaeologists have found tons of awesome artifacts, they have yet to this day come across any remnants of the Amber Room. And even today, this lack of archaeological evidence fuels a lot of mysteries around the disappearance of this room. Because after the war, reports had come out that the Amber Room had survived the war, that it had been moved from Königsberg Castle before the final assault. And several eyewitnesses even claim that after the evacuation of East Prussia, they saw crates containing panels of the Amber Room along with other treasures being loaded onto a ship called the Wilhelm Gustloff. So not long after that ship started sailing, it was torpedoed 3 times by a Russian submarine, and it went down with over 9,000 people on board, most of which died. And it's believed to this very day that the Amber Room is still on board that ship at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, along with other treasures. And while there has been some salvage of the ship since it went down, it's now considered a war grave, and diving within 500 meters of the ship is extremely prohibited. So to this very day, we have no idea if those crates are on that ship because we cannot simply get to that ship. However, it is very unlikely that it is on that ship because in 1997, something interesting happened. One of 4 stone mosaics that decorated the Amber Room was found in Germany. This stone mosaic was called Feel and Touch, and it was in the possession of a family of a soldier who claimed to have helped pack up the Amber Room chamber. This was deemed as an authentic piece of the Amber Room and was actually used in the reconstruction of the Amber Room. And you can go visit this stone mosaic today. And it's like, okay, this is just one piece of the Amber Room, where's the rest of it? Well, there are some other hypotheses about that. And one hypothesis was that it wasn't on the Wilhelm Gustav, it was on another ship called the SS Karlsruhe, which also took place in Operation Hannibal, so the sea evacuation of German soldiers and civilians from East Prussia. Now, this ship was sunk off the coast of Poland in 1945, and in 2020, some Polish divers dived this wreck, and they said that this wreck contains various crates with unknown contents. Now, could some of those contents be the missing pieces of the Amber Room or other looted artworks from this area? We're really not going to know until somebody dives that wreck again and finds out. But unfortunately, as with most things in life, the most plausible story is the most mundane and least hopeful, and that it's the simple fact that the Amber Room is still buried under Königsberg Castle, and that this simply comes from the fact is we have real documentation of what was going on at Königsberg Castle at this time. And it summarizes that given all the facts, the Amber Room was destroyed sometime between 9 and 11, 1945, either after the Allied bombing of the castle or during the Soviet shelling and occupation of the castle. And these dates correspond with the end of the Battle of Königsberg, which on April 9th ended with the surrender of the German garrison. Adding to the weight of this hypothesis is the fact that some of the Italian stone mosaics were found burned in the rubble of this castle. And this is further confirmed by a Lieutenant Leonid Arnstein. He was a lieutenant in the Red Army in a rifle platoon. He was at the Battle of Königsberg, and he is quoted as saying, "I was probably one of the last people who saw the Amber Room." Now, this all kind of falls under Cold War controversy because the last thing the Soviets wanted spreading around was that their own army had destroyed this priceless Russian treasure. So they may have fueled rumors that the Amber Room was still out there somewhere to be found, and that became the origin of the urban legend surrounding what happened to the Amber Room. Me, personally, I think it's laying in one of those collapsed tunnels or cellars underneath the ruins of Königsberg Castle. Whether or not it's still intact, it's hard to say. It was already brittle at the time they were moving it around. It's possible that if those tunnels had collapsed, it crushed these panels into pieces. But it's also possible that some of these cellars and tunnels under Königsberg Castle are still intact and the entrances are just buried under rubble, and they're just still sitting in their crates waiting to be found where they were left 79 years ago. And one day archaeologists might just find it. And if they ever do find it, it would be one of the greatest archaeological finds of that century, possibly this century, who knows. Because a modern estimate of the value of that room is somewhere around $500 million. Now, obviously, if it was found, it would end up in the hands of the state, most likely Russia, but that team of archaeologists would be remembered forever as the archaeological team that found one of the greatest lost treasures of World War II. But it's not just priceless works of art that were looted during this time. Billions of dollars worth of gold was looted across Europe, and a lot of it still remains out there to this very day, mostly in international banks. For example, the Swiss National Bank still holds about $8 billion worth of gold, looted Nazi gold, in their vaults or whatever to this day. And basically the regime is stealing all this gold because at the time their economy basically sucks, especially during the war when they're trying to finance this massive war machine. So in order to purchase materials like war materials from neutral countries, so stuff like tungsten, which could be used to create armor-piercing bullets, for example, they were buying this by using gold, which they would send to these foreign banks. Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, even Argentina were recipients of this gold. And this makes sense because during the war, these were neutral countries, so they had no great vested interest in the outcome of the war, so they were willing to sell war materials to anybody who was willing to buy them. And one very large recipient of a lot of this gold was the Vatican. And this comes from an OSS document known as the Bigelow Report. So in 1945, the Vatican confiscated 350 million Swiss francs, or about $1.5 billion today, of Nazi gold for, quote, safekeeping. The report stated that the balance of gold was held in one of the Vatican Swiss bank accounts. And other intelligence at the time corroborated this, and then shortly after the war, more than 200 million Swiss francs, mostly gold coins, was transferred to the Vatican Bank with the assistance of Roman Catholic clergy and the Franciscan order. Now, the Catholic Church and the Pope and the Vatican and all those dickbags, they assert to this day that this is all a fraud. It's a conspiracy theory. There's no looted Nazi gold in their banks. But can we really trust anything that the Catholic Church says? I personally don't. Let's remember, this is the same institution which turned a blind eye to the Holocaust. They were Nazi sympathizers, and they allowed many Nazi war criminals to come through their institutions. They falsified passports for them, they falsified Red Cross documents for them, and flooded the New World with these fucking Nazi war criminals. And in exchange for doing this, a lot of these Nazi war criminals, they knew the whereabouts of a lot of looted gold, looted artifacts, looted artwork, and caches of money that were stashed all over Europe at this time. And in exchange for getting them out of Europe, I'm sure that more than one of these Nazi war criminals who were on the run were revealing these locations to these priests and bishops and cardinals and whatnot, and that a lot of that war plunder that is still lost to this day, along with billions of dollars of plundered gold, is still sitting in the Vatican, possibly in the deepest parts of the archives, possibly in the Vatican Bank, possibly in the back storerooms of monasteries and stuff across Europe. Or who knows, maybe in the private collections of the Pope or other bishops or cardinals or whatever. And we all know how secretive the Catholic Church is. They will never disclose whether or not they are in possession of those looted items. However, that's not to say that everything is lost. In the closing days of the war, we actually found a major stash of Nazi gold in the Cazador assault mine in Merkers. So this takes place during the closing days of the war. On April 4th, 1945, the 90th Infantry Division took this area, Merkers, which is in Thuringia. And on the morning of the 6th, these two military police, they were kind of enforcing this curfew that was going around with the civilians. So the MPs are out and about on their duties, and they come across these two French women, and they're like, hey, what are you doing out? You shouldn't be out at this time. And one of the French ladies is like, I'm pregnant, I need help, I'm looking for a doctor. So while escorting him back to town, they drive by the entrance to the Casador salt mine, and one of the ladies says that's where the Nazis stored this massive cache of gold and other treasures. So eventually they get back to their unit and they attempt to tell these other officers, but they're not really interested. However, word spreads around, and later that day, the big higher-ups, the brass, they get a hold of an assistant director of the National Gallery in Berlin who admitted that he was in Merkers to care for paintings stored in the mine. So they get to this mine and it's kind of walled off, so these engineers from the 90th Infantry Division, they blast a hole in it, and on the other side of this walled off area, they find a room 75 feet wide and 151 feet deep. And it was like a scene out of like a treasure hunting movie. So they get into this room and they found 3,682 bags and cartons of German currency, 80 bags of foreign currency, 8,307 gold bars, 55 boxes of gold bullion, 3,326 bags of gold coins, 63 bags of silver, 1 bag of platinum bars, 8 bags of gold rings, and 207 bags and containers of various loot that was very valuable artwork. And if you go online, you can see pictures of this mine when they first stumbled upon it. And just knowing that in that one room alone, there was billions of dollars worth of accumulated wealth, it really kicks off this idea that this stuff could be all over Europe. Hell, it could possibly be all over the world. And in subsequent decades, that would reign true because these treasures did turn up all over the world. Private art collections, private banks. Almost every year, whenever an art auction happens, we are finding more and more pieces of art which was suspected to or which has been known to have been looted during this time. And people are still searching for this treasure today. One infamous treasure from this time that everybody's still searching for is the missing Nazi gold train. Now, some people over the years have claimed to have found it or at least know the whereabouts of it. However, it has never been confirmed that it has ever been found. Now, the problem with this gold train is to this day, nobody knows whether or not it was a real train. A lot of historians have come to believe that it is an urban legend, and even if you go to the Wikipedia page about it, it's stated on the title as an urban legend. So hey, it makes it perfect for my show. So put simply, in the closing days of the war, while the Nazis were being pushed out of Poland by the Red Army and the Polish resistance, let's not forget the contributions of the Polish resistance. So as the German army was being driven out, they were in southwestern Poland and they had filled this train with gold and priceless artworks and various treasures. So this train leaves Berselau, which is now, I guess, Wrocław. So the train arrives at the station Freiburg in Schlesien, but it didn't reach the next station in Waldenburg in Schlesien. So somewhere in between these two stations, the train just disappears. Now, it's believed that somewhere in between these two rail stations, the train had entered an abandoned coal mine or an underground tunnel system, where it was subsequently abandoned by these German soldiers, and the mine or whatever tunnel system was sealed off, and to this day it has never been found or recovered. And it's supposed that on this train was more than 330 tons of gold, jewels, weapons, and artistic masterpieces. And since 1945, this rumored train has been searched for by the Red Army, the subsequent Polish Army, many amateurs and historians, and they have all come up dry. The train can't be found, the tunnel system can't be found, hell, even the rails leading to the tunnel system can't be found. Now, in between the years of 2015 and 2018, these two Polish guys were using ground penetration radar, which is a great tool used by archaeologists to find various anomalies underground which don't match the geology of the area. So they found this anomaly on these scans and they decided, hey, this must be where the gold train is. So a bunch of private investors got together, the Polish army got together, and teams of archaeologists and stuff got together. However, they weren't able to find anything. It unfortunately did turn out to be a geologic anomaly. I think it was just a natural underground cavern or something. But despite the fact that it's been 70 plus years and this train has still not been found, that doesn't deter people from searching for it to this very day. And to be honest, these stories just scratch the very tip, the very surface of the massive amount of stuff that was looted by Nazis during World War II. I haven't even begun to discuss the countless priceless pieces of art in which their provenance is very questionable during the period of 1933 to 1945, which have been found in private art collections all over the world. The most famous of these was probably in the Gurlitt collection. Now, the Gurlitt collection is this collection of about 1,500 artworks that was assembled by a man known as Hildebrand Gurlitt. He was an art historian, a gallery operator, and one of 4 hand-picked art dealers by the Nazi regime who was allowed to deal in degenerate art. And many artifacts from this collection are said to have spurious provenance. And some pieces have recently been identified as known pieces of after they turned up in art auctions in the last 10-15 years. So Hildebrand, he collects this artwork throughout his life, and he still has this extensive art collection up until his death in 1954 when he's killed in a car accident. He leaves it to his wife, who then, after she passes, leaves it to her son Cornelius. And their son, following their father's footsteps, he's an art historian, and he never really has a real day job because, they're wealthy enough that he can live off the inheritance for a while. And later in life, whenever he needs to raise money for his living expenses, he just goes to Switzerland and sells one of these paintings. And this artwork is priceless. It contains drawings and prints and dealer stock from some of the greatest artists out there. Monet, Cézanne, Picasso, Renoir, Delacroix, so on and so forth. I can go on for days. It's said that this art collection alone was worth tens of millions of dollars. Now, this artwork was never public. I guess after the war, Hildebrand, he had it stashed in his house. And then after he died, his wife buys these apartments, and Cornelius, the son, he buys this little house in Austria, and they have the artwork stashed in these apartments. So this artwork was in a private collection, not publicly known, until a few of them kind of trickle out into the auction world. But it all kind of blows up for Cornelius late in life. So in about 2010, he's traveling back from Switzerland because he has a Swiss bank account, and he goes to Switzerland like every 4 to 6 weeks to withdraw money to pay for his living expenses. So he's on his way back to Germany, and he stopped by, I don't know, like customs officials or the train cops, or I don't really know how they do it in Europe. We don't really have passenger rail here in America, but let's just say it's the train cops. They stop him because they think he's suspicious. And when they ask him what he's doing, where he's going, why he's carrying 9,000 euros on him, instead of just being awesome and just saying, "Fuck you, pig, none of your business, is there a lawyer around here?" he casually just explains, "I'm an art dealer. These are the proceeds from selling my art. I travel to Switzerland once every month or so to withdraw some cash from my living expenses." So the train cops are now more suspicious. They think that he's probably selling these artworks on the international market in order to avoid paying German taxes. So it launches this investigation, and they basically seek out a warrant, and they go into these apartments, and they find the Gurlitt collection, this huge World War II treasure trove of some of the greatest paintings that had disappeared during the war. Now, he fights this in the courts. He's basically like, "Fuck you, I legally inherited this from my father. You can't take it from me." However, he never does see this collection again. For a long time, he vehemently denies that any of these are looted artworks from World War II. However, after a few years of fighting this, and he's looking at the end and he's doing his will, he kind of has a change of heart. He states that he's going to will his collection to this museum in Austria, and if any of these pieces do turn out to be looted pieces of art, he will allow their repatriation to their families. And after his death, this museum investigates this collection, and some of them do turn out to be pieces of looted art. A lot of them end up being suspicious, however they can't prove otherwise, and some of them do turn out to be legitimate pieces of art that his father had collected throughout his career as an art dealer. And a lot of those pieces are still kind of in those museums to this day. Now, I think a few of them that were confirmed not to be looted pieces of art have been sold on international markets and are in private collections, but now they remain in the hands of the state for the most part. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the amount of art that has been lost that are probably sitting in apartments in like Munich or Paris or, I don't know, Prague, anywhere and everywhere in Europe. and held probably across the world in these private art collections that we're never going to see and we're never going to know about. But that does fuel the mystery of maybe one day you'll walk into an apartment in some city and you'll come across a treasure trove of art that was stolen from World War II, or in the back of an art gallery, or in the warehouse of a monastery, because a lot of these treasures were never destroyed. They're still out there somewhere. Somebody has them. There are literal lists out there of great artwork. Some of these paintings, a single painting can sell for over $500,000. And if some of that stuff is ever found just sitting in an abandoned apartment or in the back of an abandoned warehouse, it would be the treasure hunting find of a lifetime. But I think I am going to end it here. I am getting a little long-winded. In my first recording of this, I went into an extremely detailed account of Cornelius Gurlitt's life and his collection, so if you want to hear that, let me know. I'll release it as a bonus segment. And I didn't even get into the Asian part of this, so look out for, I guess, part 2 of this coming sometime in the future, I don't know, where I focus on other looted treasures from World War II and what possibly happened to those treasures. South America. But as always, if you did enjoy the episode, I would appreciate some feedback. I would appreciate it if you shared it with everybody you know, your friends, your enemies, who cares? Share it. Go to the Spotify page, give it 5 stars, give it a follow there. Even if you never listen to it there, just follow it. I mean, Spotify's free if you don't mind the occasional ad. I mean, there's no excuse not to have it. And as always, you can support me monetarily in that link in the description of every episode. You people who are already doing that are true rock stars, and I hope you continue doing that in the future. And all you newbies out there, if you do that, you'll be true rock stars too, and I would greatly appreciate it. Every dime goes to just improving this show. I don't use it for any of my own purposes. It's for your entertainment. Well, every bit of it except for that amount I had to pay in taxes this year. That wasn't fun. But I am going to end things here. Once again, this is Mike. I thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.